and welcome to the online scoping meeting for the project Waste Discharge Requirements for Non-Point Source Discharges related to certain activities conducted by the Bureau of Land Management and United States Forest Service on federal lands. Please note that because that title is a mouthful, during the rest of the presentation, the project will be referred to as the Federal Non-Point Source Permit. This meeting is presented by the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board, or Central Valley Water Board. We value and appreciate your attention and patience during this time when staff continue to work remotely. My name is Elizabeth, and I am part of the State Water Board's Office of Public Participation. I'll be the moderator for today's public meeting. I wanted to take a moment and introduce myself, but we'll be turning off my video to improve streaming quality for you, the participants. I would like to acknowledge the federal agencies that have helped bring us here today, including the Bureau of Land Management, referred to in this presentation as the BLM, and the United States Forest Service, referred to in this presentation as the Forest Service. Thank you for taking the time to participate in this scoping meeting. We value your input and look forward to receiving your comments as we work through this process. There will be opportunity to provide your input and submit comments at the end of the presentation. Let's get started. I'd like to start by highlighting the mission of the Central Valley Water Board, which is to preserve, enhance, and restore the quality of California's water resources and drinking water for the protection of the environment, public health, and all beneficial uses, and to ensure proper water resource allocation and efficient use for the benefit of present and future generations. We work to achieve our mission through an array of programs established within our major divisions. Our work here today supports the well-being of the state as we work together to provide clean, safe, and affordable water to all Californians. Now we'll move on to some meeting logistics and an overview of what will be presented today. This meeting is being held virtually through Zoom and is an opportunity for you to learn about the proposed federal non-point source permit and to provide comments on the scope and contents of the Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, that will be prepared. The presentation, including the comment portion, are being recorded. And today's agenda. We will begin by providing meeting logistics, specifically how to participate during the comment portion at the end of the presentation. We will then discuss the purpose of today's meeting, followed by a brief description of the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, review process, and then into a more detailed project description. And finally, your comment opportunities. As a reminder, Water Board staff are here to receive your comments. This scoping meeting is an opportunity for you to provide those comments. Now our meeting logistics. This presentation, including the comment portion, is being recorded and will be made available online following the meeting. Please note that presenters will not be sharing their video today to improve streaming quality. In the event that you get disconnected from the meeting, please rejoin using the Zoom link or the call-in number. If this presentation is currently too big for your screen, please set your view to fit screen. This can be done by accessing the zoom ratio in the drop-down labeled View Options. Typically, the View Options settings are found on the top of your screen. However, it can also be found on the bottom of some screens. All participants will be muted throughout the presentation until the end when comments will be solicited, at which time commenters wishing to speak will be called on individually. Prior to the comment portion of the meeting, we will provide participation instructions. The Zoom chat feature to everyone has been disabled for this meeting. However, if participants wish to submit written comments during the presentation, they can be emailed to the address shown on your screen. That address is rb5r-fed.mps.permit@waterboards.ca.gov. This inbox will be monitored throughout the presentation, and time permitting, comments received during the presentation via email will be read aloud at the end of the meeting. Also, if you are having technical issues, please email the above address, provide a description of your issue, and the best method to contact you. There will be two ways to provide comments during today's meeting. The first option is to provide oral comments. At the end of the presentation, there will be an opportunity for oral comments. At that time, you will need to use the raised hand function to indicate your desire to comment, and I will call on you when it's your turn to speak. Although not a requirement, we request that you provide your first and last name and organization or affiliation prior to your comment. In order to accommodate all participant comments, speakers may be limited to 3 minutes. The second option is to provide written comments via email. When emailing, although again it is not required, we encourage you to provide your first and last name and which organization or agency you represent. Indicate in your email if you'd like your comment to be read out loud at this meeting. In the subject line, please write Public Scoping Comment. Today's meeting is solely for the purpose of providing information about the CEQA review process and to receive comments regarding the scope and content of information to be included in the EIR that will be prepared for the proposed federal non-point source permit. To align with the CEQA scoping meeting format, staff will not be providing verbal responses to comments today. Don't worry, we'll repeat these instructions again at the beginning of the comment period. Now on to our presentation. I'd like to pass the mic to our presenter, Angela Wilson.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and good afternoon, good morning to all participants joining us today. My name is Angela Wilson, and I'm a supervising engineering geologist with the Central Valley Water Board. I will be presenting the purpose of today's meeting, an overview of the CEQA review process for this project, and the project description. So let's start by defining what a CEQA scoping meeting is. A scoping meeting helps notify the public and other responsible agencies that a lead agency, in this case, the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board or Central Valley Water Board, is evaluating a project under CEQA and is the initial mechanism to solicit public and agency comment regarding the type and extent of environmental review to be undertaken for a project. The project for this scoping meeting is the proposed waste discharge requirements for non-point source discharges related to certain activities conducted by the Bureau of Land Management and the United States Forest Service on federal lands. And as Elizabeth mentioned in the introduction, the project, for obvious reasons, is referred to as the Federal Non-Point Source Permit. The purpose of today's CEQA scoping meeting is to gather input from stakeholders regarding the potential scope and content to be included in the Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, that will be prepared for the proposed federal non-point source permit. This meeting is an opportunity for stakeholders to identify a range of actions, alternatives, mitigation measures, and potentially significant effects that may result from the Central Valley Water Board's potential adoption of the proposed federal non-point source permit. Please note that this meeting is not focused on the details of the proposed permit itself because the development process is not yet complete. The scoping comments you provide will be used in the development of the EIR for this project. Now I'm going to transition to providing an overview of the CEQA review process. The purposes of CEQA, as provided in the guidelines, section 15002, are as follows: to inform governmental decision makers and the public about the potential significant environmental effects of proposed activities, to identify the ways that environmental damage can be avoided or significantly reduced, to prevent significant avoidable damage to the environment by requiring changes in projects through the use of alternatives or mitigation measures when the governmental agency finds the changes to be feasible, and to disclose to the public the reasons why a governmental agency approved a project in the manner the agency chose if significant environmental effects are involved. The Central Valley Water Board has primary responsibility for developing, adopting, implementing, and enforcing the proposed federal non-point source permit. As such, the Central Valley Water Board is the CEQA lead agency and will complete an EIR for this project. The EIR will identify significant effects on the environment from the project and identify a reasonable range of potentially feasible project alternatives, and indicate the manner in which any significant effects can be mitigated or avoided. The project-specific review process is accomplished through a number of steps and is guided by CEQA requirements. The Central Valley Water Board will complete the CEQA review process for the proposed federal non-point source permit as follows. All comments provided by stakeholders during the comment period will be considered in the development of the draft EIR. A draft EIR and draft federal non-point source permit will then be published and circulated to stakeholders. Another 45-day public comment period will begin with the release of the draft EIR. Following that comment period, a final EIR will be prepared. Per CEQA requirements, the final EIR will include written responses to all comments received during the draft EIR comment period. Staff will then present the final EIR and proposed federal non-point source permit to the Central Valley Water Board for its consideration and potential adoption. The anticipated schedule for these steps in the CEQA review process will be provided later in the presentation. So now we'll move into the regulatory background and project description for the proposed federal non-point source permit. There are two main laws that govern water quality regulation in California. The first is the California Porter-Cologne Water Quality Control Act, or Porter-Cologne for short. And the second is the Federal Clean Water Act. Both of these laws are drivers in preparing this permit. Porter-Cologne is the principal law governing water quality control in California, and it established the State Water Resources Control Board and the 9 regional water boards to oversee water quality on a day-to-day basis. Each regional board manages this task through development of one or more basin plans, which establish quantitative and qualitative standards to ensure the protection of the beneficial uses of water. Porter-Cologne applies broadly to all state waters, including surface waters, wetlands, and groundwater. It covers waste discharges to land, as well as to surface and groundwater, and applies to both point and non-point sources of pollution. The map of California provided on your screen displays the locations of the 9 regional water boards. The Central Valley region is the largest of the regions and is located in the center of the map in blue and labeled 5. The region extends from the Oregon border in the north of the state south to the Bakersfield area. The region encompasses all waters that drain into the center of the state. The other primary law governing water regulation in California is the Federal Clean Water Act. In California, the water boards have been delegated the authority to implement the Clean Water Act by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Section 319 of the Clean Water Act requires states to develop an approved non-point source management plan. California met this requirement in 2004 with the adoption of its policy for the implementation and enforcement of the Non-Point Source Pollution Control Program, or the Non-Point Source Policy. The Non-Point Source Policy requires the regional water boards to address non-point sources of pollution through authorities provided by Porter-Cologne. The Non-Point Source Policy directs the regional water boards to address non-point source pollution through basin plan prohibitions, waste discharge requirements, otherwise known as WDRs, and/or conditional waivers of WDRs. Both WDRs and waivers of WDRs are referred to as permits. The term waste is broadly defined by Porter-Cologne and can include sewage and any and all other waste substances from human or animal origin, or from any producing, manufacturing, or processing operation, and includes earth and inorganic materials. All projects with real or potential to discharge waste to waters of the state are subject to permitting requirements. Permits impose conditions on activities that may discharge waste and require the implementation of certain steps to mitigate the discharge of waste that may affect water quality. Permits can take one of 2 approaches. The first approach is a project-by-project approach, which means that each project or activity must gain permit coverage unique to that action. This approach can be time and resource intensive for land managers that frequently implement projects, as each project is required to go through its own CEQA, permit development, and adoption process. Additionally, a project-by-project permitting approach can potentially delay implementation of time-sensitive projects where a management action needs to occur faster than an individual permit can be developed and adopted. An alternative to the project-by-project approach is the programmatic approach, which means that permit coverage can apply for a variety of activities or projects across the landscape within a single permit. This type of permitting approach works for complex projects with many land management goals, projects that are long-term or large in scope, and projects that are ongoing. The federal non-point source permit proposes to take the programmatic approach with the intention of providing broad regulatory coverage for a variety of land management activities conducted by the BLM and Forest Service and reducing the administrative burden that comes with individual permitting. So some of the previous slides providing the Water Board's regulatory mandates to address non-point source pollution means it's worth taking a bit of time to define non-point source pollution. That is, any source of pollution that does not meet the definition of point source in the Federal Clean Water Act, which is defined as any discernible, confined, and discrete conveyance. So in contrast to the discrete nature of point source pollution, non-point source pollution is generated from diffuse sources or activities across the landscape and occurs when water mobilizes and deposits pollutants into water bodies. The intent of the proposed federal non-point source permit, as implied by its name, is to regulate non-point source pollution from lands managed by the BLM and Forest Service. The primary non-point source pollutants the federal non-point source permit proposes to regulate are sediment, nutrients, bacteria, and pesticides. An example of non-point source pollution is that of unpaved roads, where runoff may concentrate and mobilize sediment to downslope surface waters. Non-point source pollution can be attributed to broad-scale land disturbance, where water infiltration and runoff patterns may be altered. The image on this slide shows the diffuse nature of non-point source pollution and the variety of sources within a watershed that can generate this pollution. The Central Valley Water Board is working with the Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board, or Lahontan Water Board, in a collaborative process with the goal of facilitating project implementation and permit compliance on federal lands across both regions. This will be achieved through the development of waste discharge requirements that are consistent to the extent feasible, given regional differences in water quality protection issues across both water board regions. Both water boards share common project goals for the desired outcome of the proposed federal non-point source permit, which I'll share in the next slide. To be clear, the Central Valley and Lahontan Water Boards both intend to individually adopt a federal non-point source permit applicable to their region. As such, each water board will be the lead agency for a distinct CEQA review process and will propose the certification and adoption of its own EIR and federal non-point source permit. The goal of the proposed federal non-point source permit is to develop a consistent long-term regulatory approach that will maintain, protect, and restore water quality on lands managed by the BLM and Forest Service. The long-term approach is intended to provide permitting consistency and clarity. A well-defined permitting strategy is an opportunity to support the project planning needs of our federal partners. The federal non-point source permit proposes to achieve this goal through ensuring compliance with federal and state water quality regulations, through an increase in federal and state agency coordination, through the development of consistent requirements across administrative units and water board regions, and through the use of the programmatic permitting approach. The proposed federal non-point source permit involves the development of waste discharge requirements for discharges and threatened discharges of non-point source pollution from certain activities conducted by the BLM and Forest Service on federal lands within the Central Valley region. The purpose of the proposed federal non-point source permit is to ensure the maintenance, protection, and restoration of the quality and beneficial uses of water on federally managed lands, and to facilitate federal agency compliance with water quality requirements. To achieve this purpose, the federal non-point source permit proposes to require the BLM and Forest Service to implement effective water quality best management practices, or BMPs, identify and prioritize treatment of sediment discharge sites, comply with permit conditions, and comply with a monitoring and reporting program. It is important to note that the proposed federal non-point source permit is conceptual at this stage in the CEQA review process, and as such, details on the requirements are not currently available. Upon publication of the draft EIR and draft federal non-point source permit, requirements will be available for stakeholder review and comment. The project location is lands managed by the BLM and Forest Service within the Central Valley Water Board region, outlined in blue on the map on this slide. For reference, approximately 34% of land in California is managed by the BLM or Forest Service. With the BLM managing approximately 4% of the land, roughly 1.6 million acres within the Central Valley Water Board region, shown in the map on brown, and the Forest Service managing approximately 24% of the land in the region, roughly 9.3 million acres, shown in green. The inset map at the top right shows both the Central Valley and Lahontan Water Board regional boundaries and serves to highlight the extent of land under the jurisdiction of the two water boards. The BLM administrative units in relation to the Central Valley and Lahontan Water Board regions are represented in this map. The vertically hatched area represents the Central Valley Water Board region, and the horizontally hatched area represents the Lahontan Water Board region. The various colored areas represent the BLM administrative units within the two regions' boundaries. The Forest Service administrative units within the Central Valley and Lahontan Water Board regions are represented on this map. The light blue area represents the Central Valley Water Board region, the pink area represents the Lahontan Water Board region, and the colored areas represent the various national forests within the two regions' boundaries. The preceding maps illustrate that many BLM and Forest Service administrative units exist across the two water board regions and emphasize the benefit of providing consistent water quality requirements and permitting for those administrative units that are subject to the authority of both water boards. Five land management activities are proposed for regulation under the federal non-point source permit. Those activities are vegetation management, transportation system management, recreation facilities management, fire management and recovery, and restoration activities. Common to all of these activities is land disturbance, with the potential for non-point source discharges to water bodies. As mentioned previously, the proposed programmatic approach to regulating these activities includes the implementation of effective water quality BMPs, identification and treatment of sediment discharge sites, compliance with permit conditions, and with a monitoring and reporting program. I'm going to provide a description of these activities in the following slides. Vegetation management activities are typically associated with commercial timber harvest and vegetation management and may include ground-based equipment operation and the construction, reconstruction, and use of roads, skid trails, landings, watercourse crossings, and cable yarding corridors. These activities may also include certain applications of pesticides used to minimize and control vegetation, noxious and invasive plants, or other pests. The non-point source pollutant of greatest concern with respect to vegetation management activities is sediment. Soil disturbance, modification of hill slope drainage patterns, and erosion can all result in delivery of sediment to water bodies and may be managed through effective BMPs. Transportation system management activities are primarily associated with the management of roads and motorized and non-motorized trails, and may include road and trail construction, maintenance, reconstruction, decommissioning. Roads in particular represent a significant source of sediment with the potential to impact surface waters. Ensuring roads are managed using effective water quality BMPs is a valuable strategy to protecting water quality. Recreation facilities management activities may include the construction, maintenance, reconstruction, and decommissioning of campgrounds, trails, trailheads, and staging areas, high-use recreation areas, and recreation event locations. These activities can result in the potential discharge of sediment, nutrients, and pathogens to watercourses, and in some instances may result in the alteration of aquatic resources. Fire management and recovery activities are primarily associated with post-fire management and may include certain activities conducted as part of fire suppression repair, infrastructure repair, and long-term post-fire recovery efforts. These activities may include installation of erosion controls, timber salvage, hazard tree removal, revegetation efforts, and the application of pesticides. These activities can result in the potential discharges of earthen and organic materials and chemicals, specifically pesticides and petroleum byproducts, to water bodies. Restoration activities may include watercourse crossing improvement, stream channel and bank stabilization, stream channel and floodplain habitat enhancement, and meadow restoration projects. These activities can result in the potential discharge of earthen materials, nutrients, pathogens, and pesticides to water bodies. Next, I'll provide information on how stakeholders can be involved in the proposed federal non-point source permit beyond the CEQA scoping meeting. Information on the proposed federal non-point source permit for both regions can be found on the Central Valley Water Board's website. The website provided on the screen for those calling in can be accessed online at www.waterboards.ca.gov/federal NPS permit. The website contains the notice of preparation, a frequently asked questions document, maps of lands managed by the BLM and Forest Service within the Central Valley and Lahontan regions, and contact information for Water Board staff. Parties interested in receiving email updates on the proposed federal non-point source permit project can subscribe to an email listserv. Email list registration is available at the website listed here. For those calling in, that address is www.waterboards.ca.gov/resources/email_subscriptions. Select RB5-Central Valley Region when you get to that page. The image on this slide shows the available subscription options when you click on the Central Valley region, with the appropriate box checked for this project, the Federal Non-Point Source Activities Central Valley Regional Board box. This email list is a collaboration between the Central Valley and Lahontan Water Boards, and we encourage all participants who wish to receive future notifications to sign up for this email list. Subscribers will receive notifications for both permit development efforts through this email. This slide shows the anticipated schedule for the Central Valley Water Board's proposed federal non-point source permit. The dates in this table may change and are provided here to illustrate how the Central Valley Water Board intends to complete the CEQA process for this project. The CEQA process was initiated with publication of the Notice of Preparation on March 13th, 2021. The 45-day Notice of Preparation comment period began on March 13th and will close on April 27th, 2021. In spring of 2022, Central Valley Water Board plans to publish and circulate the draft EIR and the draft federal non-point source permit for stakeholder review. A 45-day comment period will begin concurrent with the publication of the draft documents. The Central Valley Water Board staff expects to present the final EIR and proposed federal non-point source permit for consideration and potential adoption by the Central Valley Water Board in the spring of 2023. There are several options for stakeholders to submit comments for the proposed federal non-point source permit project. The Central Valley Water Board will accept written comments regarding the scope and content of information to be included in the EIR. The public comment deadline for this stage of the CEQA review process, as I mentioned earlier, is April 27th, 2021. Since staff are currently teleworking, we request written comments be sent electronically via email to the Federal Nonpoint Source Project inbox at rb5r-ed.nps.permit@waterboards.ca.gov. Please include the words comment letter, proposed federal non-point source permit in the subject line of comments sent electronically. For those who prefer to send comments by mail, they can be sent to the physical address on your screen. For those calling in, mail comments to the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board, attention Angela Wilson, address 364 Knollcrest Drive, Knollcrest Drive, Suite 205, Redding, California, 96002. All written comments will become part of the official administrative record and may be made available for public review. The second option is to provide oral comments during this CEQA scoping meeting. We will provide an opportunity for oral comments shortly after we share a few additional details. While not required, we request that you state your name and any organization or agency affiliation prior to providing your comment. We request participants tailor comments towards the scope and content of information to be included in the EIR, including any potentially significant environmental impacts, reasonable alternatives, and/or mitigation measures to reduce any significant impacts. All oral comments will be transcribed and become part of the official administrative record and may be made available for public review. If you would like your comments to be applicable to the Lahontan Water Board's federal non-point source permit scoping, please include this in your comment. With that, I will turn the presentation back over to Elizabeth to oversee the commenting portion of today's scoping meeting.
Thank you, Angela, for this valuable information about the CEQA review process and proposed federal non-point source permit. And that concludes the presentation portion of today's meeting. We will now transition to hearing from you. After a few instructions, this will be your opportunity to provide comments that will support the development of the EIR that will be prepared for the proposed federal non-point source permit. In terms of procedures, only those participants who raise their hand today will be called upon to comment. If you are participating today from a computer and would like to comment, please press the raised hand icon on your taskbar to indicate your desire to comment. The raised hand feature can be found by clicking the reactions button, which will show a raised hand option. When it is your turn to comment, I will call your name and you will receive a request through Zoom to unmute. If you are participating today from a telephone, please press *9 to raise your hand, and when you are called upon to speak, please press *6 to unmute yourself. Now, for those of us that need to practice, let's practice raising our hands. Again, participants by phone will need to press *9 to raise their hand, and participants joining by computer will use the raise hand feature in Zoom. Great, I see at least a couple people know how to raise their hands. Excellent. Now let's go ahead and we're going to clear the raised hands for now. And before we start the comment period, ask you to raise your hand again in a moment for comment. We will call on people in the order that their hands are raised so that we can clearly hear all the comments. Please wait until you're called on to unmute yourself. Although it is not required, again, I know we've said this, but we encourage folks to give their full name and any agency or organizational affiliation prior to their comments. As a reminder, please keep your comments succinct. We may need to limit comments to 3 minutes in order to provide opportunity for everyone to comment who desires to do so. Also, please be aware that if your comments are running long, I may interrupt you and provide a gentle reminder about time. Now we will begin taking comments. And I see that John Buckley's hand is raised. John, would you like to unmute yourself and comment?
Good morning, John Buckley, Central Sierra Environmental Resource Center. These comments are applicable to both boards. For background for the comments, I participated with others on a state water board stakeholder committee for 2 years in 2009 and 2011 related to the topic of the Forest Service and Water Board for the water quality management plan that the Forest Service had that was out of date then, more than a decade ago. In that plan, the water quality proposals by the Forest Service was to create what I would suggest are general and non-prescriptive best management practices, along with some non-mandatory effectiveness monitoring that is rarely funded or actually implemented except as an office exercise. And because of the weak nature of that water quality management plan proposal, the stakeholder opposition was sufficient that the State Water Board did not adopt that plan. Then in 2014 and 15, the Water Board moved for a GRAP, rangeland management planning process, that also ended up failing to be implemented. So those are both a background for now the regional board focusing on waste discharge requirements for 5 activities. And the first comment I share is it's frustrating that there is no attempt by the Water Board to deal with livestock non-point source discharges on federal lands, which is the most widespread source of varying levels of pathogenic bacteria into tributary streams. But for the 5 areas of focus that are being proposed for regulation, here are 3 quick points. The first is our center urges that this process lead to the regional boards and the sister agency of the Forest Service and BLM actually producing clear requirements for measurable, meaningful BMPs that are tied to at least some degree of mandated monitoring requirements in order to actually show whether the BMPs are or are not achieving water quality objectives. So measurable and meaningful. A second key point is that it is always a likely pressure for a sister agency like the regional board to not to press for a federal agency to have to take on new burdens and responsibilities. But our center urges that there be a reasonable range of alternatives considered that are not restricted to simply managing with the status quo requirements, but actually envision what opportunities may be meaningful to add requirements. And the third key point is, most important, our center urges that waste discharge requirements for non-point source discharges have clear, measurable triggers and then clear consequences that actually result when failures are documented. And I'll end with just a question that I know won't be answered now, but I ask you to think about. Why is the Water Board proposing to not regulate discharges from third parties that are permitted on federal lands, since those are directly a result of Forest Service or BLM permits to allow those activities? So thank you. I look forward to working with the Water Board staff on this long process. Thank you.
John, thank you for your comment. Do we have any other participants that would like to comment? I don't currently see any hands. Griffin, have we received any comments via email?
No, not so far.
Thank you, Griffin. Well, we'll just give folks a couple more minutes to think about if they have any comments to provide. And then if we see none, we'll close the comment period. But just as a reminder, there are still ways to provide comments if you think of something after our meeting closes. Well, I don't want to keep everyone if nobody has any comments to add. John, it looks like you took the floor for us today. Thank you for participating. Unless I hear anything else, I'm going to close the comment portion of the CEQA scoping meeting. At this point, we would like to express our gratitude to all of today's participants. If you have any additional comments, please submit those to the email address on your screen. As a reminder, public comments will remain open until April 27th, 2021. For any other questions or comments, please contact us at rb5r-fed.mps.permit@waterboards.ca.gov. For more information on the federal non-point source permit, please visit our website at www.waterboards.ca.gov/federal NPS permit. And again, that concludes our meeting for today. Thank you again for your participation and have an excellent rest of your day. Thank you.